Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Audit Committee meeting of the 26th of February 2024. Have I got any apologies for absence, please? Thank you, Councillor Tijan. Can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 15th of July as correct? Agreed. Thank you very much. I haven't received any urgent matters. Has there any been since? No. Okay. Could I ask for any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests or any other significant interest, please? Thank you. None received. Thank you. I'd like to move on to item 5, please. The annual government statement 23-24, pages 15 to 34, please.
Good evening, members. You have a copy of the report, which is similar to reports that have been presented to you in previous years. One of the key changes to note is that CIPFA, the Council invited CIPFA to undertake a review of corporate governance. That review found no weaknesses and supported the Council's application for exceptional financial support. The Head of Internal Fraud and Audit has confirmed that there are no concerns in relation to governance. In 2024, the Government issued new guidance in respect of the value, the duty to comply with best value. That guidance obviously postdates the period covered by this report, but where relevant, that guidance has been included and applied to this report. If any members have got any questions.
Sorry, thank you, Laura. Any member? As we have no questions, we'll note the report and accept it. Thank you. Now, sorry, we move to item 6. Welcome, Vice Chair. I'm sorry. Yeah, I just spotted it. Thank you very much, Councillor Lawrence. Vice Chair, if you would, please.
I move the recommendation at page 15 that the committee is asked to comment on and approve the annual governance statement. I'd also like to apologise for being late.
Thank you, Vice Chair. That's accepted. Thank you. We're moving to item 6, the Speak Up policy. Speak Up, anti-bribery, anti-money laundering and regulation of investigatory powers policies, and the report on incidents September 2023 to September 2024. I believe that's Laura again. Thank you.
It is, Chair. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So you have the report. Obviously, the Council has agreed to a number of policies to tackle any unlawful acts. This report sets out those policies and details any concerns that were raised between September 23 and September 24, because you received your last report in September 23. And if there's any questions for me.
Any member, please? Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's great there's been 0 reported incidents, but I'm just wondering if there's been any change in process. Has there been any change in the persons responsible for handling any reportable incidents? Just to put our minds at rest, nothing's changed, and that's a good 0.
Thank you. I don't believe there's been any changes to the processes, and I think Phil's shaking his head. I think that's correct. I think everything has remained as it is. But just for clarity, I'm happy to take that away and check that with Bipinda and report back to you.
Yeah, I think if you can't confirm tonight, maybe just a briefing note. I think where anyone changes their whistleblowing processes, sometimes people are trying to report and can't because the numbers changed or the person dealing with it has changed. Thank you.
Phil, please.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I will confirm what Laura's just said. The personnel involved, so the whistleblowing group, which is me, the monitoring officer, and the chief organisation culture officer, that's the whistleblowing group. That hasn't changed, well, ever since we had the whistleblowing policy renamed to the Speak Up. Yeah. Speak Up policy. So, yeah, I can confirm that there have been no changes that might impact on those numbers. All right.
Councillor Tijan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one from me with regards to whether there's anything in place in terms of training other, colleagues, staff, or members with regards to some of the regulations in terms of anti-bribery or anti-money laundering.
I know that there are policies, and those are given to employees to read when they join the council, and people regularly refresh themselves. I'm not sure there's any specific training further than that, Councillor Tijan.
Yes, the reason I threw that out in another role elsewhere, I found it very helpful just having, some sort of, as you say, the policy is there, and the policy is there for interpretation by the individual, and there's certain things that people might not even recognize the full ramification. So if we could look at just having something, some form of, training or information that could be shared among colleagues, an example of mistakes or example of misunderstanding, that might be helpful.
Yeah, we can look at whether we do anything through our meta compliance, just to remind people that the policies are there, and the process that they need to go through if they think they've been received a whistleblowing or a referral under any of those policies.
Councillor Nesterov, please.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a series of questions. I just want to understand how the whole process works, because we have 4 whistleblowers this year, and they all came back that their claims are unsubstantiated. Yep. Is it similar the year before that as well?
So those aren't from this year, they're from the year before. So I think they're from 22 to 23. So looking at the report, they came to you in September 23, and this is just giving you kind of the background of what then happened with those. I don't know the specific details, but obviously those would have been investigated fully, and those are the outcomes from that investigation.
My question is, how are the investigations done, and who is doing the investigation? Because for me, it seems like 100% unsubstantiated claims seems a bit odd. At least one of them would be a substantial claim. And you don't want whistleblowers to fall through the fingers, and then other people not coming forward because they know they're just going to end up with their claim being unsubstantiated.
If I could ask the Head of Internal Audit and Counter Fraud to answer your question, Councillor Nesterov, please.
Thank you, Chair. Since April of last year, the investigation of all internal matters has been part of my team's responsibility, and we've actually increased the resource to do that. So we carry out independent investigations. The service themselves don't investigate these matters, we do. And I think looking at those 4, we have been responsible for all 4 of those. I mean, obviously the names aren't on here, so I can't be 100% certain, but looking at the circumstances, I think they do seem familiar, and I think we've dealt with all 4, unless any of them came in before those changes took place. As I say, we've had that responsibility since last April, but everything's undertaken independently now.
And how do you check these claims? Obviously, there are no recordings, so it's he said, she said.
Everything we do, obviously in these cases, it's unethical conduct, so it's breaches of the code of conduct. So everything's investigated in line with the council's disciplinary policy and procedures. So we follow those. Obviously, for an internal matter, it's about balance of probability of whether something has happened. The officers conduct the investigation. reach a conclusion which is then passed to HR and the commissioning managers. Obviously, if there was disagreement with the conclusion reached, it's possible that things could still go to a hearing, but in all 4 cases there was no evidence to actually show that there had been any unethical behaviour on the part of those involved.
My question's answered. Thank you.
I've just got, it's more a comment than a question. On one hand, I agree with Councillor Lawrence that it's good that there's 0. I am a little bit concerned when I see a report for a whole year that there's 0 raised. They may, I'm not sure if people have raised something, but it hasn't been recorded because it didn't move to a formal situation. Is that a possibility? I am really concerned that these are such important things that people need to be able to talk freely in that way. And I'm just a bit concerned about that 0. But if that is genuinely because there weren't any, or there were some and they didn't move, then I'm content. But I would like some assurance, and it may not fall to you guys to do this, that we have a methodology in which we can raise the profile of encouragement for people. And I know it's a little, that's kind of been touched on before, but I think we should formally find a way to do that.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, people can report concerns in a number of ways, and the Speak Up policy covers specific areas. So it may be that certain things are reported, but they don't actually fall under the whistleblowing policy. So the fact that there is 0 could mean that there have been things reported that don't necessarily meet the criteria, that fall under the scope of the whistleblowing policy, but that are still investigated, but they're investigated separately. I don't know that that's the case here. I'm just offering that as a potential suggestion for this year, but certainly the policies are there. We do refer to them during fraud awareness training, because obviously people can report fraud under whistleblowing, as well as anti-bribery and money laundering as well. We do briefly cover those aspects in the fraud awareness training, but I think that might be a possible explanation.
Thank you very much, James. Councillor Lawrence, I see you want to come in.
Chair, if it's helpful, maybe we should, when we receive these reports, have a benchmark against similar authorities, if that information is publicly available in an easy way, to give us some idea how another unitary authority of our size is compared to someone else, just to give us some extra, because I think there's always a danger, we're always looking for problems, and actually sometimes problems just don't exist. And I think, you know, the Conservative administration left you such a well-run authority that we wouldn't expect to see so many problems. But I think maybe having some benchmark numbers, as SIFP have got some numbers or something like that, that would help us contextualise our own outputs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll talk to Bhupinder about whether we can access some kind of benchmark. Yeah.
Any other members? May I move? Oh, I beg your pardon, Vice Chair. I was moving to you anyway, but not as a member. Sorry, dear.
Hi, I just wondered if it's lack of evidence rather than nothing happened, but you can't, you know, if it is a he said, she said thing, it just can't be evidenced, or whether there's, you know, there has been nothing found at all.
As I say, even in instances of he said, she said, which tend to be more related to grievances than anything else, we still carry out an investigation. We'll talk to the individuals involved, we'll talk to witnesses, we'll try and gain as much information as we possibly can. In some cases, it's just not possible to reach a conclusion because there isn't evidence to give you a kind of sway in either direction. But as I say, in these 4 cases, there wasn't any evidence to substantiate the claims.
If I can come to the Vice Chair now, thank you.
I move the recommendation at page 35 that the committee is recommended to note the contents of this report And we'll look into suggestion about benchmarking with other authorities.
I now come to item 7, the Treasury Management Report for 24-25 Quarter 1. And I'll ask Andy McNally Johnson, Head of Corporate Accounts, to introduce that for us. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. It's worth pointing out, because we do have other members here who wouldn't normally be here tonight, Treasury Management is the management of the Council's investments, borrowing and its cash flow. This is an update on the performance of that during Quarter 1. The report meets the revised reporting recommendations in the SITFA Code, and it also forms part of a number of Treasury Management reports that we would present both to the Audit Committee and to Council in the case of the mid-year and the strategy. To go on to the report, it's worth just setting the scene with a few things here. It is anticipated that interest rates are likely to reduce over the coming 2 to 3 years. And unless there is an event that would affect economies in a negative way, we're fairly confident, and so are our Treasury advisors, that will happen. Paragraph 4.8 shows the latest forecasts from Link available at the time this report was produced. The current base rate of 5% is unlikely to change, we feel, until at least November. In May, Link had forecast December. But what I would say is perhaps the reduction may be more stilted with the latest industry views that I've had, and we may only see a further reduction of between 0.5% and 1% during 2025. But again, this will be subject to economic factors and forecasts. During Quarter 1, Link continued to recommend avoid taking long-term borrowing due to the impending expected fall in interest rates. But we are currently and constantly reviewing this approach, but whilst taking their advice. And it may be worth just mentioning here in paragraph 6.1, I think that's on page 42, where we talk about approved limits. We have reported a breach of our short-term borrowing limit. That borrowing limit is set in the Treasury strategy. I would say, and it says in there, it was a small breach and it was very quickly rectified. But it is something that we are talking about and looking at longer term borrowing when the opportunity arises, because we do have a lot of very short term borrowing, and that obviously is a bit of a pressure on us. It's worth saying with the position on borrowing right now, it's looking like this year we will end up having to pay with maturity just over 114 million before the end of this year, and a further 80 million next year as things stand at the moment. What I can say is we are obviously arranging loans all the time, whether that be to cover other loans that we are paying back or capital, our capital expenditure. And the last, or the most recent loans we have arranged have maturity dates now into 2026, 27 and 27, 28. So we are trying to do that where we can. It's always also worth pointing out in paragraph 9.2, a LOBO was repaid back in April. So during Quarter 1, that was where the lender exercise their option to change the interest rates. At that point, we as the borrower have the option to agree to that or repay it, and it was our decision that we would repay that. In paragraph 8.1, you can see that the borrowing has increased in the quarter by 21.445 million. Again, that would have been down to our capital expenditure that we incur. Borrowing still remains below the CFR, our capital financing requirement, which is obviously something we have to do to prove that we are borrowing for capital purposes only. As a net borrower, we don't have an awful lot of money to invest, and most of our balances are required for day-to-day cash. So we deposit with banks or with accounts where they are call accounts where we can get access to that money quickly. We do have property funds as well, and you will see from that two things there. One that probably you're already aware of, the Lothbury Fund has now ceased. We did take account of the loss in that fund in the budget for 23-4. We are still receiving money back on the remainder of that fund, and we are receiving that as and when Lothbury sell those remaining properties. The two other property funds, as you'll see, they are still struggling with valuations at the current time, although that is something we accept as a long-term investment. But you'll also see the dividends are still good for that. So we still feel at this point it's a worthwhile investment that we would continue to keep. However, it is something that we, like all things, we'll keep that under review, and to make sure that actually that is giving us the best value for the money we've invested. As at Q1, our finance and interest in costs are expected to be within budget, and you can see that as in paragraph 12.2, which is on page 46. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. My only concern about this report is like nearly 3 months out of date, effectively, and I wonder if there's any way we can have these meetings much closer to the end of the quarter dates so that we're getting a more up-to-date report. It may not have any impact whatsoever, and I don't know how long it takes Andy to produce his quarterly Treasury report. I'm sure it's not happening on the 1st of October. But it strikes me we're looking at quite historical data. I'll make that as a comment, and I'll just leave it with the Chair and Phil if that's something we can think about. I'm sorry, this is going to sound probably a stupid question. Can you just, before I ask my other question, what is unfinanced capital spend? From what, reading it as it is, it would seem that we've got capital spend lined up, but we haven't raised the loans to do it. Would that be it?
So basically, our capital expenditure is funded from a number of sources.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, and some of them we would say are funded because it could be capital grants, capital receipts. Those that are not funded and at the time the schemes are approved, that's made clear, will be funded from borrowing.
Okay, it's just that's fine. It's what it says on the camera, isn't it? Okay. I'm just, in terms of the 21 million that we had to refinance, the 21.3 where the lend, we just borrowed that somewhere else, did we? Was it at a higher rate?
I would need to check on that one. I would say that it is likely that it would be a slightly higher rate, but not hugely higher.
Yeah.
I mean, to give some examples here, when I'm looking at the, when I talk about maturity and some of the loans we've got to pay back, when I've looked at weighted average on some of those loans for loans we have with other local authorities, those loans we've got to pay back this year, we're looking at just under 4.4% as a weighted average. At the moment, yes, things are slightly higher, but we do expect them to come down. So I don't expect, as we refinance those, it's going to leave us in a very difficult position. And PWLB loans that we've got, they're higher than that at this point when we repay those. So options are there. They're about 5.5% for the current year when we repay those back. So what I would say is, when Lobos were taken out, which was in the sort of between, I think, 2003 and 2008, they'd have all been taken out probably, although they for a long term, those interest rates are normally around the 4 to 4.5%.
Yeah, that would be a normal rate, yeah.
So the Lobo that we're just talking about, that Lobo had been taken out at 4.32%, and it was Commerce Bank, wasn't it, that exercised their option, and they quoted us a figure of 5.62%. So we probably refinanced it with PWLB at not much different to that.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
All
Yeah,
right,
okay.
but we took it short term, whereas that would have locked us in for continuation to another 40 years. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The only other thing is given the uncertainty of our financial position, and obviously every time we borrow, it impacts revenue because of the financing costs, is it wise and prudent for us to be entering into lots more borrowing, as appears to in some of this, until the council's revenue position is sorted? Because if this was my own business borrowing money and I didn't know where my revenue was coming from, I'd be a little bit worried. But I think from memory, the revenue impact of the new borrowing from last year into this year is about 5.5 million increase. And if we're now going to be borrowing more money, but interest rates aren't coming down as fast, that's just another 5 million that the administration's got to find, and it's not got any certainty on its revenue at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Phil, if you could take that, please.
So part of the work that we've been doing to manage the revenue budget pressures is to review our capital programme quite critically and saying, do we need to do this? Do we need to do it now? Can we do it for less cost? Reviewing all of the schemes. I mean, some of the big ones, we've paused any further work on IPM. Now, that's not simply to save money. There are other reasons for that as well. But yes, we are looking at that because absolutely cognizant that every time you borrow, it hits the revenue account. Obviously, we've got exceptional financial support as well, which in itself is additional borrowing that we're going to have to service through the revenue budget. But you're absolutely right. We'll try and minimise that where we can.
Thank you, Phil. I think also we should be cognizant of the additional borrowing that the council is likely to have to enter into over the next 2 years, which is another 20 million quid, I think it is, to support the revenue budget. So I think, I'm happy with what you're saying on that. I have one more question just on the loans to MDC. I looked at the MDC's accounts for last year. I just happened to be bored and went to Companies House and thought I'd have a quick look, and they made quite a substantial loss last year. Given the difficulties in the housing market, and are we happy that they're moving to a rent-based, aren't they? They're doing more rentals at the moment in order to wait for an upturn in the property market. But my concern there is that the government want us to build tens of thousands of new houses. Is there a danger that actually more supply is going to make the price a little bit softer a bit down the line? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So MDC's strategy of moving to private rental is in response to the market. And there's two strands to it, because some of the blocks are going, there's a definite strategy to put them for private rental for the long term. But there are other blocks and units within certainly the Chatham waterfront is the one that's coming on stream at the moment, where we're going for private rental as a hold position, but potentially looking to sell them when there is an upturn in the market. Now, the loss that you refer to in the accounts, I've seen the revised business plan, and the PRS is part of the solution to that. But you can't actually report a profit at the moment because those revenues haven't come in. But over the longer term, it does point to profitability.
Councillor Nestorov, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. I almost forgot all of them. So you mentioned that this year we have to return around 114 million in loans, and we're gonna probably refinance them from other lenders. Is that gonna be with lesser rate or larger rate than what we had them so far?
So I think, as I said before, a weighted average of the loans that we've got to pay back, and obviously that each loan will have its own rate, we've got just under 4.4%. I think at the moment when we're going to the market, we're probably looking at a little bit more than that at the moment, but it's coming down to around a 4.7 at the moment. And bearing in mind that we do expect interest rates before the end of the year to fall further, we believe that there won't be a huge difference for any that we do refinance. Where we only refinance when we have to. Okay, so we'll look at it, we'll look at our cash flow, and if we feel like we don't need to refinance at that point, we won't do it. But having looked at it, I don't feel there's a massive problem for us, and we are forecasting that overall our interest and financing budget, when we take account of all this, we feel like we can cope within the budget that is set and potentially come in under as well.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we finally see rates coming down in the near future. Yep.
So Andy's referred to our average cost of borrowing at the moment, but if you to unpack the profile of that, 2 years ago, when we had some debt that needed refinancing, we were absolutely refinancing at a higher rate, but that's now baked into the Treasury budget. That massive short-term debt that we've now got to refinance was only taken out 1 or 2 years ago for the most part. So it was at a higher rate, and actually we're probably not seeing much increase in terms of refinancing that, and actually over the next 2 or 3 years we'll probably see a benefit.
Yeah, my point is that our expenditure to pay that loan will be higher now, but eventually in 2-3 years when the rate goes down,
Exactly.
our repayment of the loan.
That's right. Which is why we're taking the short-term strategy at the moment.
So yeah, hopefully
But
then we can return more of the loan.
But we're having to take some that sort of, when we talk about short and long term, it's very technical, because long term basically means anything over 12 months with a maturity of over 12 months. That's counted as long term in terms of this report. So actually we've taken some long-term loans, but they're actually only 2 or 3 years, and we've had to do that so that we don't trigger our it's not the boundary, the limits, sorry, the limit. Don't trigger the limit. I couldn't remember the word. Yeah.
The other question was, I mean, that's good. That's good. Rates coming down means more money for the council, more money for everyone. So hopefully in the next couple of years, things will loans will start going down, the council loans. I want to ask about the Lodbury Fund, which is now seized. Did we get something back from that investment? 2 point something, isn't it? Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, we've received, I think, 3 tranches of payments, but again, we had one large one and a couple of smaller ones, and it is as they sell off those remaining properties, they're coming back to us, but obviously it'll be based on the value of that fund at the end of May when it ceased, so we're obviously hoping to get that back.
My question is, are we looking to reinvest that money into something else? Maybe not property fund this time.
So, no, there's nothing that, I mean, it was a dipping of the toe in the water at the time. It was prevailing wisdom at the time. Lots of authorities were diversifying their investments. But I think for Medway, we don't hold enough cash to worry too much about investment, and I would rather be repaying debt at the moment. Yeah, but that's a business case in its own right. In terms of just pure cash flow, I've got cash. I won't put it into treasury investments. I'll pay off debt.
Just finally, I just want to note that we are still keeping in the upper return of all other local authorities, close to the green line, which is good. Just wanted to note that. No, just page 46. I just want to note that we're still keeping on the upper end of the returns.
I just have, it's probably the opposite end or the complementary end to the question that Councillor Lawrence was delving into with you, Phil, and this was the impact of our borrowing on our revenue account. I'd like some, just a little bit of understanding as to actually how are we progressing. I know in certain areas we have serious overspends, but then again we have fees and charges and stuff like that coming in, and I was just wondering, given that there is very tight management on this, especially financial management, are we on track to kind of reduce our unpaid charges and fees? Or are we going to, given the state of the economic situation on the street, I'm just trying to get some comfort about that side. I know we're looking at borrowing here, but I'm looking at the collection side of things.
Okay. So yeah, your question is about how we're performing in terms of debt collection. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the word I couldn't remember.
Yeah. So the collection fund is actually performing really well at the moment. So part of the suite of measures to balance the budget for the current year was invest to save to maximise our collection fund returns. Now, the indications that I'm getting at the moment from the team are that not only are we delivering those stretch targets in the collection fund, that we expect to manifest a surplus at the end of the financial year on the collection fund. So that's holding up pretty well in terms of collection rate and additional yield. Fees and charges. We've over the last few years, we've invested a lot of energy into corporate debt and how we chase debt, how we monitor debt, how we engage with services so that they understand that just because they've raised an invoice doesn't mean they've got the cash and that we've actually still got to collect it. So I think we're doing pretty well in that area, but obviously the point you're making is that we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis still and people haven't got disposable cash. I think at the moment we're okay and we're making sufficient provisions. That's the important thing. Where there's a risk of non-collection, our provisions are in probably the strongest place they've ever been in terms of making adequate provision for non-collection of debt.
Thank you for that. I thank officers actually for the attention that are, I think they probably always gave it, but I think the added attention to the explanation of spending officers, that where sort of the whole money cycle. And I think that that's important for an organisation the size of this. And I thank you. And maybe you could take that back to other officers. Pushing the stuff down to spending managers to manage, I think, is a really good thing to do. Another question. I'm sorry about that, Councillor Tijan.
Thank you, Chair. I was just curious as to, what is the short-term borrowing used for, and how and what form does that come in? Is it overdraft? Is it loan? And what sort of interest rate are we incurring currently?
Okay, well, we obviously do have an agreed overdraft on our accounts, but what we carry out is a daily treasury function looking at our cash flow. We actually carry that cash flow through and project about a year and a half to look at what likely balances are and our likely need for borrowing to ensure that we have enough cash to pay what we need to do. But it's important to say within that, our borrowing is for capital purposes, but obviously it assists our cash flow. So, for example, we may get capital grants in, they come in and sit in our bank accounts, and obviously that's taken account in those bank accounts, money goes out, and at other times we have to borrow. As far as rates go, when we're looking at borrowing, we will look at the most favourable rates we can get at the time. Those tend to be, for example, if we go to the PWLB is it's actually based on the gilt yield, which is government bonds, plus I think it's 80 basis points. How that translates into an interest rate, obviously that changes over time, and we get two rate changes in day. We get one in the morning and one in the afternoon that we'll look at, and that will be from anything from up to a year to 50 years, the interest rates will be. As a local authority, we benefit from a certainty rate, which gives us 20 basis points off of the maturity rate that PWLB offer. If it's for HRA purposes, we can get 40 basis points off, so that's an important one for us to understand what we're borrowing for. We can also go to the market to other local authorities, and we will often do that through brokers that we use who will come back with offers for interest rates, and we'll look at those, and if we feel they're favourable, we'll look to do that. So it's a mixture of borrowing. Our short and long-term borrowing is mainly PWLB and other local authorities, with obviously the LOBOs, which are very long-term, and as I said earlier, we took those out probably between 2003 and 2008, and they've got a fair way to go unless the lender exercises their option to change rates. But as rates start to come down, I think that starts to subside as such. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Chair, if I may come back, please. I mean, how do you make sure we don't overshoot again? And the last one, do you have any concern about the council's ability to manage or repay these debt without impacting services?
I think the first point, I think, is I have to say, and I will hold my hands up, I think myself and my colleagues are gaining experience every day in this, and my former colleague Jonathan had a lot of experience in this area. He obviously retired early this year, And I think it was just an oversight which we noticed very quickly. However, having made that oversight, which we've reported here, it's very clear in our minds that we don't intend that to happen again. So both myself and my colleague Claire Sharman, who is now in Jonathan's old role, are very clear on that we will make sure that doesn't happen again. With regards to the risk on what you say day-to-day activities, well, the interest and financing forms part of our overall revenue budget, so our costs of borrowing, but also our income from investments, and our minimum revenue provision, which is something we have to do under the Prudential Code to pay back our borrowing through revenue. That is all something that we undertake as part of the extensive monitoring of our budgets that happens every month now. So we're taking very close eye on all of those things to make sure that we can make that work. And at the moment, as we've reported here, and as you'll see as we report further quarters, we believe that interest and financing budget is holding up very well at this point. And as Phil has alluded to, we think as interest rates start to come down, we will hope to benefit from a budget point of view further in the future.
Any other member? No, okay. May I move to the Vice Chair then, please?
I move the recommendation at page 39 that the committee is asked to note the Treasury Management Report.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry. And we now move on to the Internal Annual Report for 23-24, and I'd ask James Larkin to introduce that first.
Thank you, Chair. The Internal Audit Annual Report, which can be found at Appendix 1, outlines the performance of the service against the agreed work plans for 2023-24 and brings together the information provided in the 3 updates presented to the committee during the year, along with additional information relating to work completed since the last update. Section 3, starting on page 60, details the resources available to the team during the year. The original plans were based upon projected resources at the start of the year, which took into account the working days of all staff, less annual leave, allowances for training, administration, etc. This projection forecast that 712 days would be available for internal audit work. However, due to the impact of one auditor reducing their hours and an underestimate in the level of time required for professional qualification training associated with apprenticeships, 645.8 days of chargeable activity was actually undertaken. 95% of that related to internal audit assurance activity and the remaining 5% on consultancy activity. As the Council's Chief Audit Executive, I am required to deliver an opinion on the adequacy of the Council's governance arrangements, framework of risk management and system of internal control. The basis for the opinion is formed in part by the internal audit assurance work undertaken throughout the year, but also considers other forms of assurance, including external inspections, and obviously the consultancy and advice work we also carry out, which all feeds into the process for delivering the annual governance statement. These factors are detailed in section 4, starting on page 61, and I have reflected that where we have identified weaknesses, the actions for improvement have been accepted by management with a commitment for them to be implemented. Where reviews have resulted in a red opinion, I have taken into account actions the associated actions that have been completed since those reviews were finished. On the basis of this overall evidence, I have given a positive annual opinion, which can be found on page 62. Section 5 on page 63 provides the real detail of the work undertaken throughout the year. As you will see in the initial bullet points, the agreed plans, were amended during the year to take into account changes to the resource available and the committee approved those changes in year. The tables in this section, so that's page 64 onwards, show the results of each of the planned assurance review for members' consideration and the current position for any reviews that are yet to have reports finalised with clients. You will note the outturn for planned delivery as of the 31st of March was 85% against the target of 95%. We continue to work hard to finish any outstanding reviews and also clear a backlog of quality control work, but have been hampered by ongoing resourcing issues. This is followed by 3 tables commencing on page 89 that detail the responsive or alternative assurance work and also the consultancy work undertaken during the year. The team had 13 performance measures for 23-24, which are detailed in a quality assurance and improvement programme. Those performance measures are listed in the table at section 6, starting on page 92. Some key things to point out. IA7 shows the proportion of our estimated resources delivered as 91%, which is linked to the resource impacts mentioned in section 3 that could not be predicted at the start of the year. Measures 11 and 12 relate to the actions agreed throughout the course of audit reviews, and you'll see that 80.8% were implemented during the year, so that's 80 out of 99. Finally, the details of the actions agreed and those completed can all be found in the table at section 7, commencing on page 94. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you, James. Any member? Councillor Lawrence, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. So it's the first time I've seen the audit report. It was a really interesting read. Just in terms of resources, I think the effectiveness of your team is around resources at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, do you, maybe I shouldn't be asking this question in an open meeting, are you happy with the level of resources? And, you know, ideally, if you had a blank cheque, how many more auditors would you have? But going back to my point about benchmarking in a previous item is, I think it'd be great to benchmark the amount of resource that this council provides for internal audit against similar authorities, just to give members a view as to whether we should be putting more money into the service. I just wondered on page 92, the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme, it'd be great to see some comparisons with the previous year. So has the service got more efficient, done more, as a way of us being able to comment more, because it's a snapshot of what you did in that year. I wonder whether you know things like time given over to professional training and things like that. That's really important, absolutely. But does sickness play a role amongst the team? So can we have that number in future, the number of days lost to sickness? IA6, either the target's an old target or it's costing a lot more to do this work than I think we just need to move the number. If you're never going to do, if the average is now 7,000 to do a piece of work, there's no point reporting a target of less than 5,000. I think we just need to be realistic moving forward. I had just a couple of very minor questions. More how you do it is the highways and maintenance. Obviously, the big issue there is contractual, the contract with Norse. Norse do the work? Sorry, Volker. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, yeah. Is anyone in your team actually technically experienced enough to actually be able to do that work? How do you actually go that? Because a part of your role is value for money. So if I look at Hempstead Road and the awful work done in Hempstead Road or not done, how are you as internal audit assessing that when you're looking at individual jobs that represented value for money? I'm just interested in the process. And then one final point, and then I'll be quiet, is I was very interested in the actions, but I think the bit of data that's missing is the date the action needed to be delivered by, and then that would allow us to say, well, if the date was, let's say, June 24, and it's still not completed, we could then ask some more intelligent questions about what are the barriers that you're finding to getting that piece of work. So is it departmental traction, resistance, resource, I think that would be quite a good thing for this committee to be able to question and hopefully provide some supportive challenge on that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. To pick up on a couple of the first things you mentioned about the level of resource, am I happy what we have in terms of as an establishment for the team? Yes, and we have actually, I've got some benchmarking information from other local authorities, and we're not drastically out of kilter considering the size of the authority, the fact we're a shared service and things like that. We're actually probably on a par with most.
Great. Thank you.
Moving on slightly about sickness playing a part in resource losses. For last year, no. As I say, part of the reasons last year were an underestimate in how much time was going to be taken up with the professional qualification training linked to those on apprenticeships. And obviously, an auditor decided to reduce their hours and go part-time. So that was the impact. This year, yes, it's very much about sickness, unfortunately. The NHS have been unkind to me and caught up on their operation backlog. So I've had a couple of people off post-operative, which just happened to literally happen a month or two apart. So can't be helped, one of those things. And we've also, one of the auditors has left us to join Greenwich. So that again is another impact. So in terms of our establishment, I think it's fine.
Okay,
there's no problem there. In terms of the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme and our performance measures, I can try and do comparisons to the previous year, but we review that programme annually and it's approved by this committee, so some of those performance measures do actually change, but we can look at what we can put in there. In terms of IA6, so the average cost for an assurance review, the simple answer to that is yes. Obviously the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme that we used last year for 23-24 would have been approved by this committee in around January of 23. So certainly it's got the target that we have for this year is the same, and it's going to have to change, but that target was set before a 5% pay increase was agreed. So there's impacts that I can't predict at that time, but yes, certainly it's going to have to change. In terms of the highways maintenance, we don't actually carry out inspections of their individual jobs. What we're looking at is about the controls around the contract management. Does the service have those controls in place to do that work, to monitor that contract and make sure it's being delivered adequately? We're there to provide assurance that that's actually, those controls are in place and operating effectively. We're certainly not qualified to go out and say, you've laid that road wrong. In terms of the actions, I understand totally what you're saying. The difficulty we have is there may be 5-6 actions out of one review, and each one will have its own date for implementation. So it gets a bit unwieldy. All of that information does go to divisional management team level, so that we're constant. Every month, if any action's due at the end of a month, about a week before, we start a follow-up process. So all the responsible officers are contacted for an update. Has it been implemented? If not, what's the progress on it? All of that information is shared with CMT on a quarterly basis. The information also goes to the divisional management team so that ADs can ask service managers what's going on, why isn't this done? So there is an escalation process. What the committee do receive, and you'll see it in the next item, the update report, if something goes to 6 months overdue beyond its implementation date, that is when it's specifically flagged to this committee so that the committee can ask questions. We accept there's going to be slippage, obviously, like me when I'm setting the plan and trying to work out how much, be Mystic Meg and say how much resource am I going to have next year. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So when dates are agreed, implementation dates are agreed by services, they're saying, right, we think we can achieve it by this date. And then 3 weeks later, someone goes off long-term sick. There's an impact that they couldn't have predicted. So there is an escalation process, but it's not escalated to this committee until it goes significantly overdue, which is obviously 6 months beyond its date.
Of course. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. So some of the previous recommendations that were significantly delayed were associated with system changes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So the auditors have recommended building in some kind of control. The managers come back and said, well, we're implementing a new system that will fix that.
And they're never on time.
And it's going to, and they're never on time, aren't they? You've hit the nail on the head, and that's often the sort of. I mean, I think what the Audit Committee needs to do is, you know, be aware that we are a lean authority and capacity is an issue, but the internal audit team flag the risks around some of these actions that are agreed as high, medium and low, and it's the high ones.
Yeah.
They're the risk ones, and if we're not delivering those on time, they're the ones that we probably need to be beaten up for.
If it's helpful, thank you for that, and I totally agree. I think the last thing this committee wants is to look at line by line, but maybe having the overall end date of an individual piece of work rather than the or is the question, when do the portfolio holders become aware that there's an issue that might be affecting the authority at sort of the more political administration level? So if it's been escalated to CMT, for example, so that they can give the appropriate manager the what he needs. But I'm just wondering. Yeah, I'm reasonably satisfied with what you're saying. I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but it's good to see the level of detail. But if stuff's still open, why is it still open? And I take your point. Maybe it's only the red items that we really should be that worried about. Thank you.
I think in terms of the portfolio, I mean, we don't report the recommendations to portfolio holders, do we? That we rely on the managers to do that, don't we? So there'll be a senior manager. Any audit report, it will go to the relevant service head, but it'll also be copied into the relevant AD or director. It should be part of their suite of stuff that they discuss with their portfolio holders.
Yeah, just to add to that, when we finalise a review, obviously while it's in progress, it only goes to the officers that we're working with, but the finalised reports go to the assistant director, the chief exec gets a copy of all final reports, and the portfolio holder also receives the final report. Yeah, the final reports do go to the portfolio holder. Whether portfolio holders follow up, I don't know. But that's obviously the discussion between the service and their portfolio holder. And obviously the reports are also shared with this committee as well.
I think this raises quite an interesting point, Chair, from an ONS perspective, actually, because when portfolio holders come in front of ONSs, it would be, you know, it could be a line of questioning around what's going on in their portfolio in terms of where internal audit have suggested action to be taken, and are they driving some of that action through in their discussions with directors and ADs?
I'm not sure that individual internal audits, that scrutiny committees will have time to do, you know, if there's 6 in one area. But I think trends will be something that people will be aware of, especially at CMT level with the portfolio holders. Because it could be that there is a trend in one area, but there is an understanding as to why that exists. But it's outside the control of this. We definitely scrutinise, and James is very diligent with his information to us. I know you're relatively new to the committee, but do be assured that those of us who have been around, we can do a bit of tracing on where trends and specific difficulties. Internal audit have been very helpful to this committee on that. Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Cheejan? No? Councillor Lawrence, do you need to come back? Are you all right? Thank you. If I may move to the Vice Chair, please.
I move the recommendation at page 55 that the committee has recommended to note the work undertaken by the internal audit team for Medway during 2023-24 in providing an effective service to the council.
That agreed? Thank you. If I may, I'll move to item 9, internal audit update from 1st of April to 31st of August 2024, and I'll ask James for this one as well, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report at Appendix 1 is the first update on progress for the 24-25, detailing the work of the team from the 1st of April to 31st of August 2024, and focuses on the plan for Q1, Q2. Section 4 on page 103 of your pack shows how our resources have been used over the period, and also details the fact that we are projecting a loss of 96 days from the resources projected to be available at the start of the year. Full details of the reviews from 2023-24 that have been finalised since April are included in the annual report. So the tables in section 5 started on page 104, focus on the current year only. This table starting on page 106 detail the other assurance and consultancy activity that has also been undertaken in the period by internal audit. An update against the team's key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 6 of the report, which starts on page 108. We have made limited progress against the agreed plan, with 17% underway as of the 31st of August, but unfortunately none finalised. This is again the consequence of resourcing issues. As of today, I can tell you that unfortunately it's still 0% on the assignments delivered, but we have increased to 20% underway. So as some people have been coming back to work, things are getting back on track. Section 7 details some requested amendments to the agreed plan for Q1, Q2 to defer 2 reviews to next year, and also remove one that is no longer suitable to go ahead. All of these changes will help to address part of our resource losses with minimal impact on the level of assurance we can deliver, given that it's no longer suitable for them to go ahead. With regards to the companies, we are also looking at how we can seek assurance from the company itself, as well as provide assurance over the governance around the interactions between the company and the council in the future. Finally, section 8 of the report provides an update in relation to all agreed actions in the table commencing on page 110. And following on from the questions that we've just talked about, the second table on page 112 details actions outstanding more than 6 months after their agreed implementation date. Updates have been provided by the services on progress with all those actions, and a number of requests for amendments to implementation dates are included. In the case of the tree service action, it's been determined that this will be cancelled and the level of risk associated with non-implementation tolerated by the service. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Any question? Yes, Councillor Lawrence, you kick off this time.
James has come here tonight. He does want to go home. Someone saying no one asked me a question about the plan. I only had one question actually on this. MDC represents quite a big risk to the council, and I know the governance structures have changed, but I'm assuming MDC do an external audit anyway of their financial accounts. So, and we will have line of sight on those. So if there are any controls that they determine were not in good order, then we would know about those fairly early on. Or are they being identified in the management reports and the new management and monitoring structures? Thank you.
So, yes, MDC produce their accounts and they are externally audited. The problem we've got with MDC at the moment is that they are delayed, so we haven't yet received, to be fair, I haven't even received their draft accounts yet. I have for the other company, so I've had Kindies. I have seen the accounts, but no, we haven't had the audited version yet, and it is causing us a bit of a problem, if I'm honest, because we're trying to consolidate and get our own audit done. But in answer to the question, are they externally audited? Yes, they are, yeah.
Thank you, Phil. They're not going to miss the statutory deadline, though, are they?
Well, that for them it'd be December, so they're on track to do that.
Right.
They're telling me November, yeah. But
Are they? And what's the weakness? What is the reason for the delay that they're giving the council?
I'm not entirely sure. There's been a lot of to-ing and fro-ing between their accountants and them. I saw an earlier version and posed some questions about the treatment of stock. I think it's part of the issue is that the PRS is a new strategy, and how they've reflected the asset, whether it's stock for sale or an investment asset, has been, they've struggled with the presentation of that, I think, and so there's been a bit of churn and throwing with the accountants. That's what I'm assuming based on my involvement.
Thank you, Phil. Just one more question on the resource issue. Are you able to offer overtime and things like that in order to try and reduce this 96 days? Because, you know, some people would do the overtime if it was available to them, I think.
We could potentially consider overtime, but we've also got to bear in mind that we need to work with other services, so if their people aren't available, it can be problematic. At the moment, we've moved, one of our investigators has moved across to internal audit for the remainder of the year to help plug some of that resource gap while we sort out a longer term solution. You know, I've kind of shuffled my pack, as it were, to try and move some resource where it's needed. That cannot be, we've done it for the remainder of this financial year. We can't really sustain it for any longer than that, but we are in the process of sorting out a longer term solution right now. The problem we've got is the market is pretty flat. Various councils across Kent, so my colleagues, we have the chief auditors all get together every so often, and we're not alone with struggling to recruit. It's national shortage of qualified auditors, unfortunately. Same sort of thing in social care, there's a national shortage of people and things like that. So whether we go out to market at the moment, I don't know, but we're looking at what our options are to try and resolve it without, hopefully, what I want to avoid is expensive interims, because I just don't, by the time we get someone in, bearing in mind we're across two councils, they've got to get to know two organisations. I mean, yes, they know the work, but they don't know how our organisations work, who they've got to talk to. I just don't think we'd get what we need for what it's going to cost us. So ideally, we're going to get someone in permanent.
Yeah, I think interims throw up other issues as well, because when they leave, you're dealing with what they've left you with. It's not always opportune. I mean, just in my role as a chair of trustees for a MAT, we've actually working with an external organisation to create degree level apprenticeships, so that we can, rather than trying to find teachers who've been through teacher training, we take TAs, for example, and grow our own. And maybe that's something to discuss with HR. I know you did mention apprenticeships, but it's whether you can then keep them in the business once they've dealt with their apprenticeship.
Yeah, we are using apprenticeships to upskill our existing staff, and we did actually take on an apprentice in, I want to say, November 2022. We were part of the pilot exercise for the Medway process, and through that we actually changed our role to be a career graded one, creating a trainee internal auditor post that progressed to an internal auditor. So she was actually successful at getting a permanent gig just as she was finishing her apprenticeship. So we've built that as part of the career progression framework for the service. We've built that in, so we can take people with no experience and build them up, and that is possibly the way we will end up going. If we can't get anyone qualified, we'll take on someone that we can train up internally.
Thank you for that, James. I was going to ask you what you were doing about the person who left to go to Greenwich. And maybe in a wider context, but you have, I think, explained that the market is flat. It isn't that people don't want to come to Medway.
No, as I say, I think it's a problem nationally, and certainly having spoken to colleagues across Kent, there's a lot of shared services across the county, but a number of them are struggling to recruit. I know the Dartford and Sevenoaks partnership, for example, have been out to recruit, been out to advert several times, and still there's just not anyone there. They are actually trying to recruit to a senior audit position as well, so they really do want, that is for someone with experience, and there's just not the applicants out there. So, as I say, we're looking at all options for what we can do at the moment. We've got a short-term fix, as it were, in place, because although they're different roles, both of them involve analysis of evidence and things like that. So the investigators have got the requisite skill sets. They just don't have to interrogate people, but they have to have a conversation when they're doing audit, not interrogate people. So, yeah, as I say, we've got a short-term solution for the moment just to keep us going for a bit while we sort out something longer term.
Thanks for that. I think that there is an assurance to this committee that it isn't kind of like our location is a problem, because we've got transport links, and obviously so have Dartford. So it has to be that it is the market, and it is.
It's going to be salary differential between private and public practice, isn't it? If you're a university grad, you know, you're probably going to get more money in private practice than you may necessarily get in public. Well, it's either that or we need to.
They don't know the value of working for James. That's the problem. Have I got any other questions on this part? I think. May I move to the Vice Chair then, please? Thank you, James.
I move the recommendations at page 99 that the committee is recommended to note the outputs and performance against the internal audit plan Q1, Q2 for Medway for the period 1st of April to 31st of August 2024 as detailed at Appendix 1. The committee is recommended to agree the revised implementation dates as detailed in Section 8 of Appendix 1.
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'd like to move to item 10, please. It's the internal audit plan, Q3, Q4, 24-25. James, you're on again.
Thank you, Chair. The proposed plan for Q3, Q4 is presented at Appendix 1 and starts on page 117, although the reviews themselves are listed in the tables commencing on page 120. Our risk assessment was refreshed in July, along with updates to the level of resource expected to be available and the draft plan prepared. Overall, the number of reviews producing a formal opinion that's predicted to be undertaken during the year has reduced slightly, but this was unavoidable given our resource losses. We have adjusted the timeframes to include some light touch reviews in some areas to try and get a wider area covered. We'll also be providing ongoing assurance over the Council's FIP plan. The plan itself continues to be focused on the highest areas of risk to provide the necessary assurance to the Council, and as with the plan for Q1, Q2, each review has been assigned an indicative figure of 15 days for planning purposes, except where we've kind of gone for some shorter ones to spread things out a bit. But as always, the internal audit manager will have freedom to reduce or increase the allocated budget to ensure the review provides the right level of assurance. I'm now seeking the committee's approval for the proposed plan for Q3, Q4, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Mine's more of a comment. We did talk about some of the issues that are coming forward in this review, and I'm glad to see that actually the review is looking at subjects that this committee directly talked about 3 items ago. Really happy about that. Thank you. It's a very appropriate plan. Thank you. If we've got no more questions, I move into the Vice Chair.
I move the recommendation at page 115 that the committee is recommended to approve the internal audit plan Q3, Q4, 2024-25 presented as Appendix 1.
Is that agreed? Thank you very much. We're moving now to item 11, which is the Counter Fraud Annual Report 23-24. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we now move to the other side of the service. So the annual report for counter fraud, which can be found at Appendix 1, again outlines the performance of the team against the agreed work plan for 2023-24 and brings together the information provided in the 3 updates presented to this committee during the year, along with the information relating to work completed since the last update. Section 3, starting on page 128, has been introduced this year to try and provide some context with information around national reports on fraud, which may be of benefit to the committee. Section 4, starting on page 129, details the resources available to the team during the year. The projected resources at the start of the year, which took into account the working days of all staff, less annual leave, allowances for training, administration, etc., was thought to be 434 days available for counter-fraud work. However, 542.8 days of chargeable activity were undertaken. To explain, like I say, I've got to be a bit like Mystic Meg, so I'm trying to, I make allowances for potential sickness when I'm setting the number of days we expect, so things like potential sickness, training days, annual leave's obviously factored in. There's a whole host of things, so it gives us a gross figure for the number of working days, and then we get a net figure. Obviously, if people don't go off sick, which for this particular team, we didn't have a lot of sickness, that means we're actually getting more days than I was predicting. So obviously the percentage of resources delivered is over 100%, which may look odd, but that's the reason for it. Of that chargeable activity undertaken, 4.8% was spent on fraud awareness and prevention, 10.7% on proactive counter-fraud activity, 74.8% on investigative activity, and 9.7% on other counter-fraud activity. Another reason for us having more days for counter-fraud work is also a proportion of our resources now dedicated to internal investigations, but if we have a dip in those cases, then the officers will carry on with their fraud work because they all do a mixture of both. Section 5, starting on page 130, provides details of all the work undertaken in the areas under the fraud awareness and prevention category. Members will be able to see that there has been a number of sessions with other services to raise awareness, and work continued on the fraud risk assessments last year. Section 6, starting on page 131, details the proactive activity that has been undertaken, which mainly relates to the National Fraud Initiative exercise. There is some brief information relating to this, but members received the annual report for NFI in July. Section 7, starting on page 132, provides a summary of the results from investigations undertaken during the year, including the savings identified and other actions such as the recovery of one council property. Section 8 gives a brief summary of the other counter-fraud activity linked to liaison with the DWP and other investigative bodies. The team had 11 performance measures for 23-24, which are detailed in the table at section 9, starting on page 133. Members will note there has been good performance in all areas. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Nestroff, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. First, I just want to make a note that I'm happy to see that we are recovering more than we are spending, because I think last report was vice versa on the last Audit Committee. So I want to point out to point 6. In 2022-2023 exercise, we have 14,123 matches received for proactive counter-fraud activity. But in 2023-2024, we have only 3,735 matches. That's significantly less, 25% of the matches we received the previous year. Is there a reason for that, and can this be rectified somehow?
Yes, no, that's not a problem. I can answer that. The National Fraud Initiative is an exercise that's run by the Cabinet Office. So this, the main exercise, so this is one that's been running since 1996. It runs biannually, so they will match our housing benefit and council tax reduction data, payroll data, housing systems, which includes all of our tenancy data, right to buy applications, waiting list. It also includes all of our creditors' data, payroll. There's a massive amount of data sets. That exercise runs every 2 years. But alongside that, annually they run an exercise to compare council tax, single person discount information to the electoral roll. So the year that we got 14,000 matches was the big exercise with all of the data sets. The years in between, it's just the council tax data, so that's the reason for the difference, because there's only one data match undertaken rather than we get 60 odd reports on the biannual exercise, but the annual one that's purely for council tax, we'll only get about 3 or 4 reports. that's the reason for such a stark difference. We're about to do the data submissions for the next big exercise, so come December, January time, I'm probably going to be looking at another 14, 15,000 across the whole council. So.
That was actually my question. Okay, second question then, it goes to responsive investigation activity. And looking at the chart, it seems that the vast majority of cases are single-person council tax. Is there a way somehow to automate this system? To automate the system? Because if we exclude these cases, if we're able to automate it, it's going to leave a lot of more time for your team to deal with other things.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, the vast majority of cases do relate to the single person discount, but again, that relates to the matches that we receive through the Cabinet Office. Although there is a significant number, most of those are relatively easy to deal with because essentially a lot of these matches come up because the Council Tax Service just don't have the capacity to undertake annual reviews to get prompt people to report changes that may affect their entitlement. Essentially, my intelligence officers send out those review letters and we action those when they come back. So the amount of resource we have to dedicate to it is actually a lot lower than it might seem. The rest of the time is spent on the other categories of investigation. It is a time-consuming process because all those matches have to be checked, letters have to be sent out and then dealt with when they come back. But it doesn't, a lot of that time is dealt with by the intelligence officers, so the investigators are still focusing on the other areas. So yes, there's an impact, but not as much as it might seem based on those numbers.
And just my second part of the question, there is no way to automate the process. For example, if you get the data set and you match it with the electoral register, can we make the system automatically print out a letter saying, please confirm that it is not one person living there, it's more people?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's something we can do internally. As I say, we are mandated to take part in the National Fraud Initiative exercise. There are options to run it more frequently, but obviously that's at a cost. It's something we're exploring as we look to expand potentially the partnership and see what other areas if we could work with other councils. There may be other options out there where some authorities do things on a monthly basis because they've got what's known as a fraud hub. So authorities in that partnership submit their data on a more frequent basis, so they're getting matches on a more of a often churn. It's something we're looking into, but at the moment, obviously we're doing the exercise runs annually and then we respond to what comes in.
Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you. Another interesting report. I suppose a couple of commentary. It really surprised there's no housing benefit fraud identified on here. Sorry? Housing, 6 cases, but it was only to do with the council property being... It's not, I mean, I thought housing benefit would be an area that was open. I was looking on the item 7. Okay, fine. If we're happy with £6,000 and we think there's only £6,000 worth of housing benefit fraud?
It's okay, Chair, I can actually answer that. Since 2015, 2016, part of the reason we moved into a shared service was because central government created the single fraud investigation service within the Department for Work and Pensions. They're now responsible for investigating housing benefit fraud. We administer it, but they are responsible for the investigation. The law was changed and we are no longer allowed to investigate it, which is why we don't have, we no longer undertake those investigations. That's why that information is not in there. We obviously provide information to the DWP because they can't access our records when they are investigating, and I know this sounds daft, They have to come to us for what information is on our records, etc., so that we can provide that information. What should happen is when they conclude a case, they're supposed to tell us that it's been finished, and in some instances that does happen. As they gather their evidence, when they need a decision on, we've identified this, does this impact on the person's entitlement, that comes through, we act as a single point of contact. They then get we're the conduit for them to get a decision from their housing benefit team. It's at that point we know whether overpayments have been created. But their main focus is obviously universal credit. So, yeah, but that's the reason why there's only a limited amount of overpayments detailed in there. We don't actually look at it.
And the housing benefit is paid by the government anyway, so it just goes back to them. Is that the case?
Well, we receive in subsidy what we pay out, subject to various changes. However, in the case of overpayments, we only receive, so if £100, we receive whatever we pay out. But if it's identified there's only an overpayment, we only receive 40p in the pound as subsidy. So if you recover that entire overpayment, you're making 60% on it, but you've got to recover it all. So perversely and stupidly, really, it's not necessarily in your interest to identify those overpayments because it's going to cost you. But that's the way it works, unfortunately.
Unless you can guarantee recovery.
Yes, unless you guarantee recovery.
It's not a government operation, is it? God. It strikes me that, I mean, the amounts of money that you're recovering on council tax, wouldn't it be sensible if we took some of that and reinvested it into the service? Thank you.
So that is exactly what we've done. Right. So when we built the budget for this year, for 23-24, sorry, 24-25. Oh, I've got a year. 24-25. We part of the balance in that budget was we put an investor saving additional post. There were a number of investor saves around the collection fund, but one of them was specifically to target single person discounts. Yeah, I think it was 800 grand. Yeah. And that's in James's team. No. It's in the council tax team. Yeah, that's it.
Sorry, there was just one other obvious one is sublet council houses. Is that one within your gambit?
It most certainly does, and that's why we've detailed. We don't get huge numbers of referrals. We are looking at proactively seeking them out. That's something we're trying to get sorted out at the moment. I don't want to give too many details because I don't want people to know we're coming from them if members of the public are actually watching this meeting. Yeah, it's something we're working on to look at proactively, but those tenants in that table where we're referring to tenancy for all cases, that's what we're talking about.
And I'm assuming that you're working quite closely with the housing teams because they really should be identifying as a sort of as a filter maybe where they think there might be a sublet.
Yeah, obviously we work quite closely with them because when we do identify issues, we can't be judge, jury and executioner as it were, so we can't initiate recovery of the property or seeking possession or anything like that. That has to be undertaken by the housing officers. So we do work quite closely. As I say, we are going to be working with them on a proactive initiative to actively seek it out.
Any other members? Councillor Tijan.
Just one from me, Chair. The process will appear somewhat resource intensive in this digital age with the internet and things and data. I mean, what are we looking at? What's the future is going to look like? I mean, monitoring this, and I mean, are you employing any technology? Is there any plan to do that?
In terms of technology, obviously we've got, through the Cabinet Office, we've got the systems for data matching. Part of it's not just about technology, it's about data protection and there has to be legitimate pathways to share that data to identify the fraud. We do have a case management system, so all of our investigations are managed through that. So gone are the days of the quill and ink, fortunately. We do record everything there. In terms of it being labour intensive, when we receive the data matches back, there is a manual check that has to be undertaken, but that's because the system identifies a potential anomaly. It can't tell you 100% that there is an issue. So we will have to just do a manual check of records to identify, do we actually need to follow up on this? When it comes to actually sending out the letters, obviously we do use technology with mail merges and things. We don't sit and write individual letters. We've got things set up so that it automatically populates, and then there's 200 letters ready to go out in one go kind of thing. So where we can, yes, we do. There's all things about artificial intelligence, like other areas, and how we can use that. I mean, when we interview people, in days gone by, someone would have to sit and listen to that interview CD and manually type out a transcript. We're looking at ways to do that digitally so that the computer listens to it and automatically types it out. We've been trialling that with some success, but there's software out there that does it. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive at the moment because it's relatively new, but we're trying to calculate at the moment how much is it costing us in terms of officer time to type them compared to what it would cost if we had that technology. So yes, we are looking at things to see if we can get improvements, but you know, to put it in the old film noir, there's nothing like good old shoe leather out on the street and catching people doing what they shouldn't be doing. So.
Any other member? Anyone? May I move to the Vice Chair now, please?
I move the recommendation at page 125 that the committee is recommended to note the work undertaken by the counter-fraud team for Medway during 2023-24 in providing an effective service to the council.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. I now move on to item 13, the review of the Audit Committee terms of reference. Oh, I did it again, didn't I? Sorry, guys. There is, yeah, sorry, there is, isn't there? Counter fraud update from 1st of April to the 31st of August 2024.
It's
I will only moving fast, I wouldn't only leave them out.
It's okay, Chair. You can imagine how confusing it got trying to write them all at the same time. Okay, yeah, the report at Appendix 1 is the first update on progress against the plan for this year, which obviously details the work from the 1st of April to 31st of August 2024. Section 3, starting on page 130 of your pack. Is it 130? Might be slightly later than that, sorry. I might have written the wrong number. Anyway, Section 3 shows how our resources have been used over the period, detailing the time spent on each of the key areas outlined in the plan. It also outlines changes to the projected resource available due to that decision I've mentioned to refocus some of the resource by moving one of the investigators to internal audit. The tables in section 4 provide an overview of the work undertaken in each of the areas in the plan. For fraud awareness and prevention, we have been making sessions available for staff on a monthly basis, but only one has gone ahead due to a lack of sign-up for the other sessions. In terms of proactive counter-fraud activity, the NFI exercises remain up to date, and as I've already mentioned this evening, the data submissions for the next exercise will be happening in October. We've also been undertaking some desktop activity aimed at identifying unrated businesses, and now with the working with the revenues team on the next phase of that process. The table commencing on page 141 shows the summary of results from external investigations and the associated savings. It also details a recent successful prosecution. There is a brief summary of the other counter-fraud activity in the table on page 142, and an update against the key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 5 of the report on page 143. Approximately 86 investigations have been concluded with associated cashable savings of 85,549, and as it says in the report, a prevented loss of 96,000 from a blocked right to buy. I actually learned today that the maximum discount was actually increased for 24-25 and is now 102,400, so our prevented loss is actually just over 100,000. Which obviously I didn't know at the time I wrote this report, so I apologise for that error. But I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, I did read all the reports and it just throws up all these questions.
That's the
I
purpose
saw
of the committee.
I saw the headline in the press about the prosecution. I mean, it's a great job, and I think that's a good outcome because it plants a flag, doesn't it? But actually, it got me thinking in terms of, and this is probably more of an internal audit question, but arising from fraud. Have we done much internal audit work on the council's sickness policy and the various steps in it? So, for example, are we certain that managers are following the policy? And also, given the fact that we've got a lot of people working from home, it's much more difficult to identify people who are sick. Yeah, it always used to be, and I'm not besmirching any fireman who's working, but firemen used to always have 2 or 3 jobs on the side for the 3 days a week they weren't working. So I suppose my question is, as a result of that one prosecution, has that thrown anything for you to think about in terms of, are we operating our sickness policies properly? Do, for example, people on long-term sick, are we making sure that they go down to half pay at the right time or whatever that pay is? And also, are we physically meeting staff who are on long-term sick? Because with the working from home, it's really difficult, and there's a lot of employment law about, well, I don't want to meet you because I'm not well, but actually I think this case throws into sharp focus some potential issues. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start by saying that I don't think the level of risk associated with people working while off sick has increased. What I do think has increased is because of remote working and things like that, there's more people who think they can get away with it. The risk has always existed. I mean, I was working in the NHS 20 years ago, and this was one of the things we constantly looked at. It was people going off sick from their substantive post and then undertaking bank work for another trust or something like that because they could earn more money. So it's not a new thing, but you're right, with an increase in remote working and people not being visible, it's a little bit easier for them to do it. The London boroughs are already working on a pilot to do some data matching activity, again through the Cabinet Office, so they've got recruitment agencies on board and they are doing a data comparison with their payroll data to the payroll data of the agencies. Although that's happening in London, they might be employed by a London authority and then working elsewhere or vice versa. So I wouldn't be surprised if we got something, 1 or 2 coming out of that, for any nearby London boroughs. For this particular case, it hasn't identified any issues with our sickness monitoring or anything like that. They actually returned to work with us just before they left. They were off for a period of 2-3 months and then left. So I don't think, there were certainly no weaknesses in our recruitment controls because this person had been employed with us for over a year when they went off sick. So we're certainly not concerned about controls there. The questions about, do we visit people at home when they're off sick and things like that, that's something for HR more than me, I think. But yeah, I'm certainly, the case itself hasn't sort of thrown up any concerns around control weaknesses or anything like that. This was an individual who's kind of taken advantage of the fact they were off sick. It came to light because they left us to join another local, to take up a role with another local authority, and it was them that spotted, well, hang on a minute, your employment history, there's something wrong here. It was then admitted that she'd been with the individual who was employed by us, went off sick in January, 2 days later, 3 days later, whatever it was, started working as a temp for a London borough. 3 months later, starts a temping job with a second London borough, having left us, but has still got the first London borough work that's been going on for 3 months already. So it was Islington that actually contacted someone in the social care office to say, there's something not right here, can you check this? That was then flagged to us, and obviously we investigated and found what had been going on. Like I say, I don't think the level of risk has really changed. We're carrying out the fraud risk assessments at the moment. I think the risk has always been there. I think there's a misconception now that because I'm out of sight, I'm out of mind, I can get away with it. Well, obviously we're working on making sure that's not the case. Yeah. So.
Phil, if you would, thank you.
Thank you. But I think the point you made, we had a conversation at CMT not so long ago about sickness levels. So looking at our sickness levels, which are higher than we would like them to be. And that played into the whole debate about our ways of working. And I know some members have expressed concerns about that in the past, around whether productivity, that kind of stuff. I think what we concluded was that managers need to adapt the way they work, because there is a bit of the out of sight, out of mind, and I think it's more incumbent upon managers to check in and make, you know, especially when people are sick or absent for whatever reason. All I'll say is that it's on our radar as a CMT.
I'm pleased to hear that. I think at the end of the day, someone who is not sick but says they're sick, that's actually they're committing a form of fraud, because they're being paid and they're not actually delivering the services they're being paid. And I'm very sort of aware from another place, another connection I have, that when you start maybe capability monitoring someone, all of a sudden they go off sick for months and months to avoid capability. So I wonder whether there's some work to be done about understanding at the point someone's gone off sick, what's happened in the run-up to that, because I actually think this is a massive issue, you know, in terms across the public sector. Don't hear about it so much in the private sector, but it's not to say it doesn't go on. But if there are people going off sick in order to dodge capability and disciplinary and performance management, then that is something we should be identifying. Because invariably they go off with stress, and it is a stressful situation, don't get me wrong, but they can be months and months out of the business, and that impacts services to residents at the end of the day. Thank you.
So two points to pick up there. You talk about people maybe not being ill but claiming to be ill. I think maybe the bigger problem is people who are ill, not working, but then just not logging that they're, you know, they're basically not letting their manager know that they've stayed in bed because they got flu. I mean, they might be genuinely ill, but the reporting, I think, is. But having said that, our stats are showing that sickness is high. So if there's under-reporting as well, shows that is an issue for us. I've forgotten what the other thing I was going to say now. What was the last thing? Yeah, dodging capability thing, yeah. We recognise that I think some of our policy around how managers manage, because I think we've had a few instances where capability or disciplinary haven't been managed fantastically well. I'm not saying it's endemic across the whole council, but there's been some examples of that. And it would be easy to criticise managers for not handling it well, but I think some of our policy is not strong enough. And we recognise that. Sam recognised that. It's on our radar as one of many things that we need to address. But yeah.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Lawrence. In the charity sector, there is big emphasis on having difficult conversations, and that has improved the capacity to manage, to get into an issue earlier, and some of the problems that, as an ex-officer of this council and several others, leaving stuff and not doing it. So I'm, as chair of this committee, very happy to know that it is high on the radar of CMT. Any other members? Can I move to the Vice Chair then for item 12, and then we go to 13?
I move the recommendation at page 135 that the committee has recommended to note the outputs and performance of the counter-fraud team for Medway for the period 1st of April to 31st of August 2024 as detailed in Appendix 1.
Is that agreed? Thank you. Now we'll move to the terms of reference for the Audit Committee. I think that's with James as well.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I think everyone's had enough of hearing my voice now. Yeah, we are required to carry out a regular review of the committee's terms of reference, and the latest review is detailed in this report. As noted in the covering report, the previous year's review brought the terms of reference into line with the latest position statement. As there's been no change to that position statement since, there are no further changes thought to be considered appropriate to the terms of reference. So this is just for the committee's update. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Any members? As I've got no members, I'm going to move to the Vice Chair.
I move the recommendation at page 135 that the committee has recommended to approve the review of the terms of reference.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. The meeting is now closed. Thank you.